Okay. The first thing in creating this small purse is you need to create a pattern or get a pattern. I made this one using brown packaging paper. And it is from the top to the bottom, even down here past these gussets. It is about 12 inches long, and it's about 11 inches wide. And that's the pitch you'll need for the purse. Now for the flap, I cut it slightly smaller. It's about 10 wide by 11, maybe a little less than 11 inches long. So then I didn't make a strap. I had this strap for pattern piece from the pattern where I made the purse with the zipper. But if you wanted to, or if you didn't have a pattern and you wanted to make your own, this one is about 3 inches wide by, more than that, let's see, maybe 24 inches long. And I cut it on the fold. That's not what this pattern piece called for, but I want a long strap. So I've cut it on the fold so that I've got a nice long strap, and you know, throw it so you can throw it over your shoulder. And then the fabric that I'm using now, this probably looks really tacky, but I'm just making this purse for the video, so matching up fabrics is not really an issue for me in this. This is the inside, and it's a very lightweight material. This will be the lining of the fabric and the lining of the flap. For the outside, I'm using a heavyweight material because I'm not going to put any interfacing in this. To make it an easy tutorial for a beginner, I didn't want any extra work. This is going to be a very simple little purse. But this is heavyweight stuff that you might use for the words just are not with me this morning. Maybe for drapery or something like that. It's extremely heavy material. Well, not extremely heavy, but it's pretty heavy. And I didn't have enough of this fabric, so I had to find some in my stash that I could use. This is a heavyweight material I'm using for the strap because I'm not going to put interfacing in it either. So my suggestion really would be to use heavyweight fabric throughout. If you're not going to put any lining in it at all, you want the outer fabric to be kind of extra heavy and the inner fabric to be a little heavier. But this is what I have, so this is what I'm using. This is really thin material right here. So anyway, and also when you cutting out your pattern, my gussets, I made them 1 1/4 inches, which will give me about a 2-inch wide purse once it's all completed. Okay, for our very first step, we're going to sew the strap. And the first thing we want to do is fold about 1 inch over. And I know this is probably hard to see with this dark fabric, but we're going to iron it all the way down. So that fold stays in place and it stays all parity. Okay, now that we've got that 1 inch fold ironed down, we're going to take the other side and fold down about 1/2 inch and iron that all the way down. Alright, now that we've got all of that ironed down, we're going to take our piece and we're going to fold over to about 1/4 inch to the edge of the other side, and we're going to start pinning. And we're going to pin all the way down just to keep it in place. We don't want it shifting when we get ready to sew it. And this seems like a lot of pinning because this is so long, but I would not skip the step of pinning, especially if you're a beginner. I mean, even a seasoned seamstress or whatever you call it, you know, needs to pin things down because things can shift, and with something being this long, you're going to be sewing it for a good minute, and you want to make sure that nothing shifts because then it would look really messy, and that wouldn't be good. I've got my stitch length on 3. The tension is on, you know, for a fairly normal fabric. It's you don't need to loosen up the tension for this part. I'm just going to try to center it here, and if you can see what I'm doing, I usually try to gauge either by, you have a nice little gauge here, but sometimes that doesn't always work with something like this. It can be off a little bit, so I gauge by the foot. And right now what I'm doing is trying to keep this side of my presser foot right along the side of where I've got this fold. I'm gonna, if you have the ability to lower the speed on your sewing machine, I would suggest that for something like this. You really need to take your time. And as you go along, try to keep pulling each pin out, because you don't want to run over one of those pins. You could break your needle, you could hurt yourself. It's just, you know, take your time and take the pins out and go slow. And always back stitch. Sometimes if you see it starting to pucker here, you just give it a little tug on both sides. Okay, our next step is to sew the 2 outside pieces together, and we put right sides facing each other and line everything up. And then we're just going to add a few pins. You don't need to over pin at this stage. Okay. So the first step of sewing this would be to sew around these 2 sides and then along the bottom. Don't sew these gussets around here. You leave this open. And for the seam allowance, I'm just putting my presser foot, the edge of my presser foot right on the edge of the fabric here. Do is close up our gussets, and to do that we're going to open up this hole that we left here, the 2 sides that we cut, and then we're going to open up the seams on either side so that they lay flat. Sometimes it's easier said than done. And make sure your seams line up. You know, the back seam should line up with the front, both seams should line up, damn it. And then you want to pin right on the seams to start with, so that you make sure it goes to the next seam, so that they're both laying flat. And then I like to pin along the sides here too, so that everything stays in place. Then we're just going to sew about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So that's what you get, and that will square the bag so that it's got some depth to it. And this being a small bag, you don't want to make unless you want it to be really short, you don't want to make the gusset any wider than that. So I'm going to do this with the other gusset, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing with the lining of the bag. And I'll be back to show you the next step. I've got the the lining and the outer part of the bag sewn. Now we need to put the flap together. And we're going to do this by putting the right sides together. And we're only going to sew around 3 sides of this. So I'm going to pin it and leave the end open so that we can turn it. So we sewn all around 3 sides of this. We're going to clip these corners down here at the bottom, but we're not going to cut our seam. We're just going to clip the corners so that they turn nice and smooth. So you see there, I've clipped the corner, but I've not clipped the thread. Okay, so we will turn this. Take this. What I'm going to do is top stitch this opening closed, and I'm going to top stitch just at the edge around here just to give it a nice finish. So for this top stitch, I'm staying fairly close to the edge. You don't have to do those 3 sides if you don't want to, but you do need to close this top opening up. Our next step is going to be to put the pieces of the bag together. We need to turn the outside of the bag right side out. Straighten up your corners a little bit. I'm going to place this flap inside of it facing out. Just need to trim some strings there. And we're going to put it to the edge, centering it. I'm going to pin it. And I'm going to add the straps. What you want to be the inside of your strap facing out, because the way you're putting it on here, when you turn it around, that'll be the opposite side. It's pinning your seam open as well. Okay, now what I'm going to do is take it to the machine and top stitch everything really close to the edge just to hold it on there, and then we'll put the lining on. For this step, you would need to take the free arm off of your machine. I like to back stitch over the straps so that they don't come loose. So now you can see I've top stitched everything to the outside of the bag. The next step will be to add the lining. And to do that, I'm going to leave the lining wrong side out. And we're going to start stuffing everything in here. This is tricky with this long strap, but we're just going to stuff it in there. You need to make sure your straps for your bag are folded down when you start this process. We're going to line up the seams and start with that. And then I'm going to pin it. Okay, again we're doing this with the free arm off. So most of the time I like to start on a side seam, but since we need to leave this gap in the front of the bag, I'm going to start where that gap will end on one side. And it's going to be about a ½ inch seam allowance, so you leave about 1/4 inch over to the side of the presser foot, and you should get about a ½ inch seam allowance. Always make sure when you start sewing that your thread is under your needle. unless it's like a zipper foot or something, then it might get caught up. So now we just need to unpin it and turn it right side out. And we're going to grab a hold, open this little opening here, and start by trying to get the corner of the outside of the bag that's in there and pull it out. And you want to take your time because you could tear this thing open and that would be a mess. Okay, so there we go. Now we just need to close this gap up right here, the opening that we made, to turn it. But first we're going to iron it down really good, make it nice and parity. You want to kind of try to get this right here straight, because we're going to sew a top stitch all around here, and you want to make sure that everything's in its place. If you kind of do it like that, it straightens everything out without a lot of effort. I'm going to start at the place where I left the opening in the bag. I'm just going to go all around the edge, about 1/4 of an inch. When you get to the back where the flap is, you want to be sure you open that flap. You don't do that with the flap closed, or else it'll, it messes the bag up. You can just kind of take both hands and split this, kind of pull it on the sides, and then that way it's right. Back stitch that last stitch right over where you started. So there you have it, your pretty little boho bag with a nice long strap for putting it over your shoulder. And it's gusseted. You could actually you take a piece of cardboard, measure this width and length, and cut the piece of cardboard out, glue matching fabric, and put it down inside of it, and it'll give it a nice firm base. But that is it. That's our little simple little bag tutorial. And like I said, you could add button, Velcro, but you need to do all that before you completely construct the bag. It would be really difficult to do it at this point. That's it. Hope you enjoyed. Okay, so there's my little boho bag on my mannequin. You can see how it looks. It drapes nice. The strap is nice and long. I was afraid it was going to be too long or too short, but it actually turned out pretty good. This project takes about an hour and a half to complete. It's not a really long process. That would probably be from making the pattern to finishing it. Just, unless you run into some bumps along the way with construction or something happens with your machine. So it's an hour and a half project. Not too bad. Doesn't take long. And it's a cute little bag. So there you go. Once again, this was for Mel. Peace, y'all, and bye-bye.